Hello, and welcome to the Invest with Carl podcast. I'm Jamie Eppenberg, your host and a member of the CARL team. Today, we're talking about self-directed IRAs and the CARL Self Directed IRA that is going live, I think, next week, actually. I don't know when this podcast will come out, but it'll be live by then. And we have actually been taking self-directed IRAs on the platform through a manual process, testing the process for the past couple months. And we work with a partner called Equity Trust, the Equity Trust Company. So we wanted to bring you, our listeners, and you heard me talk about this a little bit in 2021, that it was coming. And we wanted to bring you, our listeners, more information about self-directed IRAs and how hedge funds might fit into that if you're interested in an alternative investment portfolio. So joining us today is John Bowens from the Equity Trust Company. John has been a self-directed IRA investor for over 15 years. And if you look at his history, if you look at his background, he has a lot in real estate investing in this space. But he also has a ton of experience and exposure in equity and hedge fund investing and other alternative investment types. The team that John runs over at Equity Trust, they are really working with high net investors and ultra high net worth investors. But these are still retail investors who are, like you, paying close attention to their own portfolios and what they're invested in. And so that team, they help investors looking into private equity, hedge funds, other types of private investment opportunities. And they help these folks move over into equity trust and funds like the CARL IRA, self-directed IRA. And I'm going to let John tell you a little bit more about what his team does and his background. Hi, John. Welcome to the show today.
Hi, Jamie. Glad to be here. Excited to provide some information, hopefully some education to your viewers. Love the podcast, by the way. I've had an opportunity to plug into quite a few of the sessions and certainly admire what your organization is doing. And I think from a technology perspective, there's a lot of synergies between Invest with CARL and Equity Trust. And obviously, there's a reason why we're working very closely together. To give you a little bit of background on myself and the teams that I operate here at Equity Trust, yes, we focus on alternative investing with self-directed IRAs, 401ks, and other tax-advantaged investment accounts. And as a custodian, what we do is allow individuals to really be able to take full control over their retirement accounts. So when we use the term self-directed, we're talking about an industry term there. We're talking about the ability for someone to be able to operate under their own discretion and be in full control of their retirement savings. And so as a custodian, we help these individuals establish self-directed IRAs, and then they have the ability to venture out and select the alternative investments that make the most sense for them. Now, in this particular conversation, we're going to focus on hedge fund investing. And that has been an opportunity that we've been facilitating for many, many years now, going back 30 plus years. Now, when I started in the business back in about 15 years ago, we had investors that would come to us that would have an opportunity to invest in a hedge fund or a private equity fund or maybe a startup. And it was very manual. There was a lot of paperwork, a lot of processes in place. And we could do it, and we learned how to master that. But what we're learning now is through all of these technology developments that could be potentially as easiest as investing in a stock or a mutual fund, but instead you're investing in a hedge fund. And I think that's what this conversation is all about, is the ability to be able to streamline through a platform and through technology, investing in hedge fund opportunities. And you'll find that the automation and the technology around self-directed IRAs, investing in a wide variety of alternative investments, is quickly developing here. So excited to be part of this conversation, Jamie, and happy to answer any questions that you or the group have.
Great. That's great. I obviously, the investors we work with are very interested in adding alternative investments to their portfolio, and specifically hedge fund investments. So give us a simple version of what a self-directed IRA is and how they came about. Because I mean, historically, I'm used to the old model of like you get a financial advisor and they help you, move over your old 401k into your IRA and they manage it for you. how new is the self-directed IRA, or how long have they been around, and what does it do for you?
Yeah, so Jamie, a self-directed IRA, it's really been around since we could say 1974, the Employee Retirement Income Securities Act. Now, most financial institutions are not geared and have the infrastructure and personnel and customer support to be able to allow investors to invest in alternative assets like hedge funds or real estate or gold and silver. Most companies are geared towards traditional investments, whereas equity trust, as an alternative asset custodian, all of our platforms, all of our technology solutions, all of our integrations with firms like your firm, CARL Invest, all of that is built for investors with that alternative investment mindset. And so when you hear the term self-directed, it's merely an industry term. It just means that you have the ability to be able to self-direct. Now, let me pause there for a moment and mention for all the viewers that you could go to a traditional financial institution and set up a self-directed IRA, but you may only be able to self-direct into traditional stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Whereas a self-directed IRA for alternative asset investing requires a specialized custodian. And that's where we can provide all those tools and resources. Now, in terms of setting up a self-directed IRA, you'll learn it's a pretty simple process. It's simply taking money from an existing IRA or 401k or other type of retirement plan and moving it over into the equity trust self-directed IRA. Of course, there's no tax consequences or penalties. That's one of the most common questions I get, Jamie, is, well, if I move my money from my existing IRA to an equity trust IRA in order to participate in this hedge fund investing opportunity, am I going to have severe tax consequences and penalties? And the answer, of course, is no. It's really no different than investing in a publicly traded asset. In this case, it's a private asset. And so that's what we facilitate here at Equity Trust Company. And my teams specialize in working with individual retail client investors one-on-one so that we can walk them through the process of opening their account, transferring their money efficiently and effectively, using all of our technology tools to make it an easy process for them so that they don't have to manually process paperwork and send it into Equity Trust. And then when they're ready to direct their funds, they inspect the opportunity. Let's say it's a hedge fund investment opportunity. They do all of their due diligence. Equity Trust is the directed custodian. So we're not participating in the due diligence. We don't endorse or recommend any third parties. We're here as the custodian and the facilitator. So the customer at that point says, okay, I'm ready to invest. My money's here. And then they direct those funds from the IRA directly to the designated investment account. So the best way for people to look at this, especially for those that are brand new to self-directed IRA investing, never even heard of the concept of being able to do this, it's really no different than investing in a publicly traded stock or mutual fund. The only difference here is instead of having an electronic certificate, you're going to have an actual certificate or an actual equity interest in a hedge fund or other type of alternative investment opportunity. And a lot of people are doing this because they want to take control and they don't want 100% of their portfolio to only be invested in a mix of stocks and mutual funds that are correlated to the traditional markets. They're looking to invest in asset classes that are, for the best way to describe it, not correlated to the traditional markets.
All right. And are those usually the types of investors you get who are saying, this old model doesn't work for me anymore. I want to, I'm paying more attention to what's in my portfolio and I want more options. I want more investment opportunities.
100%. You hit the nail on the head, Jamie. The investors that come to Equity Trust, I find that they come to us for one of three or sometimes all three reasons. The first reason is diversification. So they're looking to diversify either 100% of their portfolio into alternatives, or they want a percentage of their portfolio in alternatives. And so they're looking for additional diversification, again, investing in an asset class that's not correlated to the traditional stock market. The second reason I find is from a tax perspective, what you'll learn is IRAs and self-directed 401ks and even self-directed health savings accounts and Coverdell education savings accounts, these accounts are highly tax privileged. Jamie, you'll hear me in some of our other podcasts, you'll hear me talk about this concept of compounding interest in the absence of taxation. So an IRA is tax exempt. It's just like when you invest in a mutual fund or a stock and you have dividends coming into that IRA, those dividends are exempt from tax. You don't have a 15 or 20% dividend tax rate. It's tax exempt in your IRA. So if you can keep more of what you're making every single year, you have more dollars to put into additional investments. Those additional dollars can accelerate your compounding effects over long periods of time. And ultimately, Jamie, what that helps our investors do is it helps them get to their retirement goals in a shorter period of time. And
Right.
I'll touch on just for a moment, Jamie, for viewers that aren't familiar with a Roth IRA. The Roth IRA, for so many investors here at Equity Trust, is the most powerful financial tool in their arsenal. Because with a Roth IRA, you can put money in after tax, it grows tax-free, and when you take the money out after 59 and a half, which is the qualified retirement age, you pay 0% tax. And to put it into context of an example, and this is a real estate example, but it could be similar to hedge fund investing or parallel to hedge fund investing. I had an investor that started with about $100,000 in a Roth IRA, and through a variety of real estate transactions, some more creative than others, he was able to grow that Roth IRA from $100,000 to over $1 million in properties. He actually has 14 properties in this Roth IRA, and he's generating $139,000 in tax-free cash flow on an annual basis. And he's in retirement at this point. He's over 59 and a half, which means every year he can take a distribution of $139,000 of that cash flow, and he pays 0% tax. So the Roth IRA, fundamentally, from a compounding interest perspective, can be highly impactful for an investor. So I think that's important for folks to take away from this conversation. And if folks don't have a Roth IRA, there are ways to move money from a traditional IRA into a Roth IRA, which is known as a Roth conversion. Now, I don't want to get too far down in the weeds in this session, but know that that can be an option for individuals out there. And then last but not least, Jamie, the third reason is IRAs avoid probate. And I know it's not something that's a very catchy topic to talk about. It's not all that exciting in many instances, but it's really, really important for us to do succession planning, whether we're very young or we're very old. As you can tell, I'm well into the age of 59 and a half. I've been doing this a long time, but I'm well under 59 and a half. And I'm thinking about this every day. Who am I going to leave my Roth IRAs to? Am I going to leave it to my spouse? Am I going to leave it to my children or grandchildren or my nieces or nephews? Who am I going to leave the account to? And what's really important for me and a lot of the folks that I work with and coach and educate is that the Roth IRA, I have the peace of mind knowing that when it's left to my heirs, it avoids probate. That's really important for me. And number two, I'm leaving a lasting legacy because that Roth IRA is left to my children or grandchildren or whoever I want to leave it to, and it's tax-free. I leave them no burden of taxation when I leave them the Roth IRA. So I think those are the three fundamental points to make and why folks are attracted to using a self-directed IRA. Again, diversification, tax-exempt status, compounding interest in the absence of taxation, and then again, IRAs avoiding probate.
Thank you for that. That was a lot of information. I think obviously there's a lot of reasons to use them, and it sounds like having access to alternative investments like hedge funds. I know you mentioned real estate, but hedge funds being opening more to the retail investors. I think there's more opportunity there. Obviously, why we're partnering together. And so part of what we're talking about today is all of that power you just talked about is now it's being offered through a CARL Self Directed IRA that is powered by the Equity Trust Company. So my understanding is if someone has, funds from another IRA, funds from a 401k that, they left the firm and they have to do something with it, which is where most people end up. They now right through the CARL app are going to be able to, click a button and say, yes, I want a CARL Self-Directed IRA. And you, as you just said, have people that will help them facilitate the smooth transition of those funds into the account. And then we help facilitate right on the mobile app that they can make their investments, multiple hedge fund investments with those funds. Is that how it works? Is there anything else our investors should know?
Absolutely, Jamie. You said it right. Step one is opening and funding the self-directed IRA. Step 2 is utilizing the Invest with CARL platform to direct your investment. And then step 3 is manage your investment. So it's plugging into the appropriate portals. We have our Equity Trust proprietary portal. I understand from listening to some of your other podcasts, Jamie, that you guys have your specific portal as well with a lot of data-driven information. That's something that here at Equity Trust Company, we're very excited about, because when we can take data and pipe it into the applicable systems and fully integrate those systems, it makes for a great client experience. And I think another thing to mention here is this is, I'll call it autonomous investing. There's this concept, and I think that's a movement that's running across the country, if you will, with investors that are driving towards more autonomous investing platforms. And Equity Trust has been part of that. I know CARL Invest is paving the path for autonomy with investing in hedge funds. And I think this is really important, because what it does is it allows investors to be able to take control of their retirement plan, in particular, because that's what the topic of conversation here is, using your self-directed IRA. It allows them to take full control and be completely autonomous with their investing. And from there, there's a balance between, okay, what type of support do we need to provide, and what can customers do on their own? See, that the platform's built so that folks can do a lot on their own. They can plug into our online system. They can plug into your online system. They can get visibility and, most importantly, transparency with what's going on. I know transparency and disclosure is really important in the financial space for investors to make a good, educated decision. And so that's what we're providing here. But of course, there's the customer support element. For example, Equity Trust, we staff over 400 associates that service our over 100,000 clients. So when folks do have questions about, how do I get access to my account online? How do I fully complete my transaction? How do I establish my account and transfer or rollover funds from point A to point B? We have personnel here, and I lead many of these teams here at Equity Trust, that will actually take an investor by the hand and walk them through the process. So if you're an investor that likes to be completely DIY, you want to do everything on your own, you have the capabilities of doing that. And if you're an investor that's doing this for the very first time and you have questions and you have concerns, after all, this is your hard-earned retirement dollars. So we would expect people to ask questions and want to have conversations with actual individuals on a daily basis as they walk through their transaction, and they have the capability of doing that.
I mean, this is great. And I think we're thrilled at CARL to be able to add all of this functionality and opportunity for our investors and making it that easy. We're very excited about releasing the technology in the next week or two and getting it, just buttons away, while also making sure that there are people there to support investors through every step of this process. And I will mention that, we talked a little bit about the alternative investment space and IRA investors wanting to enter those spaces, enter those opportunities. And as they move into, we at CARL talk a lot about those opportunities being exclusive historically to the super high net worth, right? Like more than just a couple $100,000, but you kind of had to be in the multi-millions. I think data is what's changing this view, and digital opportunities and the data that can be accessed. So just want to mention, if you're thinking about a self-directed IRA and the CARL Self-Directed IRA, there's a couple pieces in the data that you probably want to look at. One is that CARL now has over 7 hedge funds. All of them you can invest in when you open a self-directed IRA, the CARL Self-Directed IRA. So you have 7 hedge funds opportunities in one. And with that, there's data within the CARL mobile app on every one of those investments. And when those investments are live, that data actually updates in real time, like throughout the day. I think we only have one commodities-based fund that is still in a daily mode. So data is critically important, and we want to make sure if you are independent and self-directed in a way that you want to be able to do your own work, your own research, that the data is available to do that. And that was important to Equity Trust as we partnered together, and it's important to us. On the same side, I want to mention and talk to John a little bit about that. We at CARL, you have the opportunity as an investor. We want you to balance your portfolio, and we want you to be able to diversify in the ways that you want, and make a portfolio that is absolutely right for you. So when you invest in a CARL self-directed IRA, you are investing in CARL funds, but you do have an equity trust account and you can expand. So even as John was talking about the real estate investments I forgot the gentleman's name, but he wish he had done that Roth IRA earlier in his life, but he did very well. But you have all of the other investment opportunities at Equity Trust. Is that right, John?
That's correct. So with a self-directed IRA, you have the ability to diversify into these hedge fund opportunities. And let's say, for example, an investor moved over some money initially for a hedge fund investment opportunity, and then they decide they want to move more money over to participate in other alternative investments. They would have the option to do that. And they can go back and forth. So if they want to go back to traditional money management, by all means, they have the ability to do that. It's not as if they're locked into this CARL IRA, so to speak. From there, in terms of the other types of alternative investments, yes, we mentioned real estate. So for someone that already invests in real estate, maybe they own rental property or they've done some fix and flip transactions, they of course can participate in those types of investments with the self-directed IRA, with the same self-directed IRA. They can invest in gold and silver. They can invest in oil and gas partnerships. They can invest in lease agreements. They can invest in private loans, trust deeds, and mortgage notes. So there's a wide array of alternative investment opportunities that are out there. Now, Equity Trust, we don't endorse a specific investment. We won't share with you, okay, this is the exact investment structure for you. You have the freedom to be able to make all of those decisions. And like I tell everyone, leverage your knowledge and expertise. So a lot of investors that I work with one-on-one, if they don't have an idea just yet on what they want to invest in, we usually have a conversation around what have they done in their career? What do they consider themselves to be an expert at? And then from there, they can determine the paths to find an investment opportunity. A great example of this is I worked with a retired surgeon. So this gentleman spent many, many years as a surgeon. He had a lot of money saved up in retirement plans. He retired and had a lot of time on his hands. And so he decided that he wanted to start participating in investing in private startups, private equity, hedge fund investment opportunities. And so he spent all these years in surgery, and he went to all these conferences and seminars over the years about all different types of surgical equipment and different procedures and proprietary mechanisms. And so we talked about, well, why don't you try to venture out into that field? Because as you're doing your research on that particular company, it's something that you did for 40 plus years that you're very passionate about, and you have a very specific expertise with. And so that's exactly what he did. So over the last 10 years, he's been using his Roth IRA funds to invest in a variety of startup companies. And some of those fail, and some of them end up making a very significant profit. And overall, he's been able to produce a very positive, meaningful yield on an annual basis. And most importantly, a yield that is in excess of what he would have otherwise made in a traditional stock market-based portfolio.
Right. Yeah, I think more and more, alternative investments is becoming common, a more common way to say you really portfolios balance better. There's more diversification. And I think digitization and access to data and making systems and processes just significantly easier has been the path to a lot of that, right? Access through digitization and what both of our companies do, really. We at CARL just wanted you to know that we did not lock this IRA into only CARL. That's all you can do. The expectation is that you do want to invest in hedge funds and you want a portion of your portfolio to be in hedge funds, but you can expand this account with Equity Trust however you would like into traditional or other alternative investment opportunities that they have. And they have a lot. We are very pleased with the partner, and we think that you have a lot of opportunity with both of us. So I've seen a lot of conversation about this, that the old 60-40 is, we have plenty of articles that say the old 60-40 is dead. And that's the, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, and you're going to be okay in 30 years, right? I think digitization has opened the world of data and the world of access. And part of what we're talking about today are investors wanting to take more control because they have access to this data and they think maybe this isn't right anymore. Maybe there's a better way. Do you hear a lot about that? Or what does Equity Trust think about these deaths to the 60-40 retirement investment model?
Yeah, and I'll say, Jamie, for us, it goes back 20 plus years, 20 plus years. So for us, it's not a new sort of concept, because for many, many years, we've had investors that are very, very loyal to local market investing, investing in their own backyard, if you will, investing in assets that they know and understand very, very well, and they have a particular expertise with. And so for those investors, they say, I don't want to put any of my money at all in the stock market. I want it all invested in alternative assets. Now, I'm not saying that that's every one of our clients. Our clients, they range from people moving over just $15,000 to people moving over $15 million. So, and I say that also so that no one gets the impression that we can only help those that are high net worth or ultra high net worth. We work with a broad range of investors. Now, in the private direct investment realm and in the hedge fund realm, oftentimes it requires you to be an accredited investor. But I think we're finding that the accredited investor population is growing and expanding as markets expand, as obviously we look at things like inflation, we look at income, and more people have the opportunity and the access to be able to invest in these types of private direct investments or hedge fund type opportunities. For example, I'm working with a couple, they're in their 30s, but over the last 10 years, they've been making as a joint couple close to $400,000 in income. And so they're accredited investors and they're in their 30s and they're participating in hedge fund investment opportunities. Who would have thought? When I started in the business, right, Jamie, when I started here 15 years ago, I was answering phone calls and it was one individual after another. Typically it was somebody between the ages of 55 and 70 years old that had a pension or a 401k from many, many years of working. And right, they rolled their money over and they invested in a, call it super secretive, nobody really knows about it, hedge fund investment opportunity or private direct investment opportunity. And now what's so exciting is I'm starting to see the democratization, if you will, of these private direct investments, and that more people have access. And obviously, CARL Invest is doing a great job of providing that type of access and digitization to the marketplace. So I think all of this is really exciting. To go back to your core question there, Jamie, what I'll say is that, in kind of closure of this segment of our podcast, is that you have the ability to invest in just about anything that you want to invest in with the self-directed IRA. And it could be an IRA, traditional, it could be a Roth IRA, it could be a SEP IRA for some individuals. You have the capacity to do all of those different types of things under that one IRA. It might be 60-40, it might be 70-30, it might be 100%. You'll have to make that decision. If you're an investor that is in retirement and you're relying on money from that IRA, that's where you're going to want to make sure you pay close attention to the liquidity capability of the retirement plan. What I mean by that is if you're invested in a private alternative investment that you can't quickly sell and get your cash out, you might want to hold some cash reserves in the IRA, or maybe hold traditional assets like stocks and mutual funds that with a click of a mouse, you can sell that position, get yourself into cash so that you can pull that cash out of the IRA. So you really have to look at it through the lens of yourself as an investor, your risk profile, what you're most comfortable with, and your lifestyle. How much money do you need every single month to live on in your retirement years? And then make the decision from there. And of course, if you have a financial advisor that is helping you through that process, make sure you dial them into these conversations so they understand what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And I'll mention to our investors, I am a CARL Self Directed IRA investor. I actually have an account through Equity Trust here with CARL now. I went through the manual process. But you all can now go through the more automated process, and we're looking to automate more and more parts of it. But it's on the mobile app now. When you go on the CARL mobile app and you select account type, there is the CARL Self Directed IRA, and we will walk you through the process. Even the transfer funds process is very straightforward. And I had, a lovely conversation with an equity trust individual, and it was a very smooth transition. So we welcome you to give it a try, bring over some funds, and start your hedge fund investment portfolio today in a more retirement and maybe your tax preferred position. And we at CARL hope to see you next time. So thank you so much for listening today. John, thank you so much for being on the show. Wonderful information. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Invest with CARL podcast. The views shared on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of CARL. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended to constitute and should not be deemed to be an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security or investment, financial advisory, legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. CARL funds are currently available to accredited investors with a minimum investment of $20,000. To learn more about CARL and to download the CARL app, go to investwithcarl.com.